The day I signed the bankruptcy papers, my hands were shaking so badly the lawyer had to steady the pen for me. I was 45 years old, sitting in a gray office that smelled like old carpet and failure, watching everything I'd built turn into legal stamps and court documents. For 20 years, I believed hard work was a promise the world would keep. I opened my business with borrowed money and hope, raised 2 daughters while balancing invoices at midnight, missed birthdays and holidays because success felt so close I could taste it. But the economy shifted, clients disappeared, and suddenly the bills came faster than the income. I tried to hold on, sold my car, skipped meals, lied to my daughters that everything was fine. The morning the bank called about foreclosure, I stood in my empty store and realized I'd sacrificed my entire life for something that could vanish in a single season. I didn't know then that losing everything would teach me what wealth really means. My name is Margaret, though most people call me Maggie. I grew up believing that if you worked hard enough, life would reward you fairly. My parents taught me that. They were simple people. My father worked in construction. My mother cleaned houses and they never complained. They saved every dollar they could. And when I graduated high school, they handed me an envelope with enough money for my first semester of community college. I remember my mother's hands when she gave it to me, rough and red from years of scrubbing other people's floors. She smiled and said, "This was their investment in my future." I promised myself I would make them proud. I studied business management at night while working retail during the day. It took me 6 years to finish a degree most people complete in 4, but I didn't mind. I was building something. I met Thomas in my 3rd year, a quiet man who worked at the hardware store near campus. He wasn't flashy or ambitious, but he was steady. And back then I thought steady was enough. We married quickly, moved into a small apartment, and within 2 years I had my first daughter, Claire. 2 years after that came Sophie. Thomas worked his shifts. I stayed home with the girls, and we lived paycheck to paycheck, like so many young families do. But I wanted more. Not luxury or excess, just security. I wanted my daughters to have opportunities I never had. So when Claire started kindergarten, I began looking for ways to earn extra income. I started baking cakes for neighbors, small orders at first, birthday cakes, anniversary desserts, nothing fancy, but people loved them. They said my cakes tasted like home, like comfort. Word spread through our neighborhood, and soon I was taking orders every weekend. Thomas thought it was a nice hobby. I thought it was the beginning of something bigger. By the time I turned 30, I'd saved enough to rent a small storefront on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just a narrow space with a single oven and a display case I bought secondhand, but it was mine. I named it Margaret's Kitchen, painted the sign myself, and opened on a Tuesday morning in April. I remember standing outside that first day, watching the sun hit the windows, feeling like I'd finally arrived somewhere important. My parents came to the opening, and my mother cried. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and whispered that she knew I'd do something special. Thomas took photos. The girls drew pictures to hang on the walls. It felt like the start of everything I'd dreamed about. The first few years were hard but hopeful. I woke at 4 every morning to start baking, worked until 7 at night, came home exhausted but satisfied. The business grew slowly. I hired a part-time assistant, then another. I expanded the menu, added specialty items, started taking catering orders for local events. People in town knew my name. They'd stop me at the grocery store to tell me how much they loved my lemon bars or ask if I could make a cake for their daughter's wedding. I felt proud in a way I'd never felt before. I was building something real, something that mattered. Thomas and I grew apart during those years, though I didn't want to admit it. He resented the time I spent at the bakery, the late nights, the weekends I couldn't take off. He said I cared more about the business than our family. I said I was doing this for our family, for our future. We had the same argument in different variations for years until eventually we just stopped arguing altogether. We became roommates who shared children and bills, but nothing else. When he moved out the week after Sophie's 10th birthday, I wasn't surprised. I was relieved. I thought losing him would hurt more than it did, but mostly I just felt tired. I threw myself deeper into the business after the divorce. It was easier than dealing with the guilt of a failed marriage, or the worry that I'd damaged my daughters somehow. Claire was 13 by then, quiet and watchful, old enough to see the cracks in everything. Sophie was 10, still young enough to believe things would be okay if I said they would. I worked harder, expanded the storefront, hired more staff, took out a loan to buy better equipment. The bank approved it easily. My credit was good. My business had consistent revenue. Everyone said I was doing everything right. Comment below where you're watching from and share if life has ever tested you like this. Don't forget to subscribe. The story is just beginning. For the next 5 years, I believed I was building an empire. My little bakery became the go-to place for weddings, corporate events, holiday parties. I hired 12 employees. I bought a commercial van for deliveries. I renovated the storefront, added seating, started serving coffee and lunch items. The loan payments were high, but the revenue kept pace. I convinced myself it was sustainable. I told myself I was finally succeeding in the way I'd always imagined. My parents were proud. My daughters had nice clothes and could afford school trips. I drove a decent car. On paper, everything looked perfect, but underneath, cracks were forming that I refused to see. The bigger I grew, the thinner my margins became. I was paying 12 salaries, plus rent, plus loan payments, plus supplies. 1 slow month and I'd dip into savings. 2 slow months and I'd delay payments. I told myself it was temporary, that business always had ups and downs. I worked longer hours to compensate, came in earlier, stayed later, handled everything myself because hiring another manager would cost too much. I stopped sleeping. Well, my back hurt from standing all day. I developed a twitch in my left eye that wouldn't go away. Then the recession hit. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a gradual slowing. Fewer orders, customers canceling events, corporate clients cutting budgets. I tried to adapt, offered discounts, ran promotions, cut costs wherever I could. I let go of 2 employees, then 3 more. I stopped taking a salary and lived off savings. I refinanced the loan at a higher interest rate just to lower the monthly payments. I told my daughters we needed to tighten our belts for a while, that things would turn around soon. Claire was 18 by then, about to start college. Sophie was 15, watching me crumble and pretending not to notice. The morning I realized I couldn't make payroll, I sat in my office with the accounting books spread across the desk, and felt something break inside me. The numbers didn't lie. I was $30,000 in debt, with no way to catch up. Revenue had dropped 40% in 6 months. Even if I fired everyone and ran the business alone, I couldn't cover the loan payment and rent. I'd built something too big to sustain and too far gone to save. I remember putting my head down on the desk and crying so hard my whole body shook. I'd spent 15 years building this place, and it was collapsing underneath me like sand. I tried everything. I called the bank to negotiate better terms. They said no. I tried to find investors. No one wanted to invest in a failing bakery. I applied for grants, emergency business loans, anything that might buy me time. Nothing came through. I stopped eating regularly because groceries felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. I wore the same 3 outfits because buying clothes seemed insane when I couldn't pay my electric bill. Claire got accepted to college with a partial scholarship, but I couldn't help with the rest. She took out loans and worked 2 jobs while studying. I told her I was sorry. She said it was okay, but I saw the disappointment in her eyes. Sophie stopped bringing friends home because she was embarrassed. Our house was falling apart. The roof leaked. The heating barely worked. The paint was peeling. I couldn't afford to fix anything. She started spending more time at her friends' houses, anywhere but home. I didn't blame her. I would have left too, if I could. But I was trapped, drowning in debt and bad decisions. Too proud to ask for help and too exhausted to keep fighting. The day the foreclosure notice arrived, I stood in my empty bakery and felt the full weight of failure settle on my shoulders. The space I'd loved so much now felt like a tomb. The ovens were cold. The display cases were empty. The walls still had photos from happier times, grand openings, satisfied customers, my daughters as children decorating cookies. I took them down one by one and packed them in a box. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was somewhere else, replaying every decision that led me here. I thought about my mother's rough hands giving me that envelope for college. I thought about Thomas taking photos on opening day. I thought about Claire's face when I told her I couldn't help with tuition. I thought about Sophie pretending everything was fine while our house fell apart. And I thought about myself at 30, standing outside this building for the first time, believing hard work was enough. I'd been so naive, so stubbornly, dangerously naive, The bankruptcy lawyer was kind in that detached, professional way. Lawyers are kind. She explained the process like she was reading from a script. Chapter 7. Complete liquidation. Discharge of debts. Fresh start. She made it sound clean, like erasing a chalkboard. But it didn't feel clean. It felt like admitting I'd failed at the one thing I'd given my entire adult life to. It felt like standing in front of everyone I knew and saying I wasn't good enough, smart enough, strong enough to make it work. The day I signed the papers, I wore my best outfit, even though it was years old and didn't fit quite right anymore. I wanted to look dignified, like someone who still had control over her life. But my hands shook when I picked up the pen, and the lawyer had to study it for me. I signed my name over and over on this form, that document, these disclosures until my signature stopped looking like mine. When it was done, the lawyer shook my hand and said, "Congratulations on my fresh start." I wanted to laugh. Nothing about this felt fresh. It felt like ending. I walked out of that office into bright afternoon sunlight that hurt my eyes. The world was moving around me, cars passing, people walking, life continuing like nothing had happened. But everything had happened. I'd lost my business, my savings, my credit, my sense of self. I was 45 years old, with no job, no prospects, and 2 daughters who needed a mother strong enough to pretend she wasn't broken. I drove home in the car I'd managed to keep, an old sedan with a broken air conditioner and a dent in the passenger door. I parked in front of the house I was about to lose, and sat there for 20 minutes, unable to make myself go inside. Sophie was at school. Claire was at college. No one was waiting for me. No one needed me to be strong right at that moment. So I sat in the car and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for months. The shame, the grief, the anger at myself for every bad decision, the terror of starting over with nothing. When I finally went inside, the house felt different. Smaller somehow, emptier. I walked through the rooms like I was seeing them for the first time. The kitchen where I'd tested recipes late at night. The living room, where the girls had done homework while I worked on business plans. The walls that held 15 years of family photos. Everything was still here, but it all felt like it belonged to someone else. Some other version of me who'd believed she could build something permanent. I made coffee out of habit and sat at the kitchen table with the bankruptcy papers spread in front of me. The numbers were final now. No more negotiations. No more extensions. No more hoping things would magically improve. This was my reality. 45, broke, and starting over from less than zero. I thought about my parents, both gone now, and wondered what they'd think of me. Would they be disappointed? Would they say I'd wasted their investment? Or would they understand that sometimes trying your hardest still isn't enough? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every decision I'd made over the past 15 years. I should have stayed small. I should have saved more. I should have seen the recession coming. I should have been smarter with debt. I should have, could have, would have. The regrets piled up like debts I could never repay. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, lying in the dark with tears on my face, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not like some movie moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Just a small, quiet realization that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of getting up in the morning. I'd lost the business, but I hadn't lost myself. Not completely. Not yet. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk, just around the neighborhood, nothing ambitious. The air was cool and clean. The sun was coming up. Birds were making noise in the trees. I'd been so consumed by saving the business that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without the weight of constant crisis. I walked slowly, letting my muscles remember how to move without purpose or destination. I passed my old bakery. Someone had already put up a for lease sign in the window. I stopped and looked at it for a long time, waiting to feel something dramatic, rage or grief or nostalgia. But mostly I just felt tired. And underneath the tiredness, a strange kind of relief. It was over. The fighting was done. I didn't have to wake up every morning wondering how I'd make it through another day. The worst had happened, and I was still standing. Over the next few weeks, I started taking stock of what I had left. Not much, honestly. Some furniture, clothes, kitchen equipment that wasn't worth selling, a car that ran most of the time. But I also had skills. I knew how to bake. I knew how to manage operations. I knew how to work hard. I knew how to start with nothing and build something. even if that something had eventually failed. The failure didn't erase the skill. I started looking for work, though it felt humiliating at first. I was 45 years old, with a recent bankruptcy on my record, applying for entry-level positions. I got rejected from most places. Overqualified, they said, or underqualified, or just not the right fit. The few interviews I got felt like performances where I had to pretend the last 5 years hadn't destroyed me. I smiled. I spoke confidently about my experience. I didn't mention that I cried most nights or that I'd started having panic attacks in grocery stores when I saw the prices. Then I got a call from a woman named Patricia who ran a small catering company. She'd heard about my bankruptcy through the local business community, and instead of being put off by it, she was curious. She said she wanted to meet me. Not for a job interview exactly, just to talk. I almost didn't go. Pride kept telling me I didn't need charity or pity. But desperation was louder than pride by then. So I went. Patricia was in her 60s, gray-haired and direct in a way I appreciated. She didn't dance around the bankruptcy. She asked me straight out what happened. So I told her, all of it. The expansion, the debt, the recession, the failure. I expected judgment. Instead, she nodded like she understood something I didn't yet. Then she told me her own story. How she'd started 3 businesses over her lifetime. How 2 of them had failed. How failure had taught her more than success ever could. She offered me a job doing what she called consultant baking. I'd work on contract, helping her develop new menu items and handle large events when her regular staff was overwhelmed. The pay was a fraction of what I'd made as a business owner, but it was something. More than something. It was a chance to use my skills without carrying the crushing weight of ownership. I accepted immediately. Working for Patricia felt strange at first. I was used to being in charge, making decisions, controlling everything. Now, I took instructions. I worked specific hours. I went home when the job was done without worrying about invoices or payroll or rent. The lack of responsibility felt wrong initially, like I was shirking some duty I couldn't name. But slowly, I started to recognize it for what it was. Freedom. Not the kind of freedom I'd chased when I opened my business. The freedom to build something big and impressive. This was quieter. The freedom to just work, to do something I was good at, to go home without the weight of an entire enterprise on my shoulders. Claire came home for winter break that year. She'd grown up somehow when I wasn't paying attention. She was working 2 jobs and taking a full course load, and she didn't complain. We sat at the kitchen table one night drinking tea, and she asked me how I was really doing. Not the polite version, the truth. So I told her. I said I was learning to be okay with being ordinary, with not being the big success story, with working for someone else and being grateful for the paycheck, with measuring my life by different standards than I'd used before. She listened quietly, then said something that stayed with me. She said she'd spent years watching me kill myself trying to build something impressive, and she'd been terrified I'd succeed because it meant that's what I'd expect from her too. But now that I'd failed and survived, she felt like she had permission to be human, to try things and fail, to not have to be perfect. She said my bankruptcy was the best gift I'd ever given her because it taught her that failure doesn't end. I cried when she said that. Not sad tears. Something else. Something like release. Sophie took longer to come around. She was still angry, still embarrassed by what we'd lost. She didn't understand yet that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what actually matters. But I didn't push her. I just kept showing up, kept being present, kept proving that I was still her mother, even if I wasn't the successful businesswoman she'd grown up with. Slowly, over months, she softened. She started coming home more, started talking to me again about small things. We rebuilt our relationship one careful conversation at a time. I worked for Patricia for 2 years, and during that time, I learned things I should have known when I was running my own business. I learned that growth isn't always good, that bigger isn't always better, that sustainability matters more than expansion, that you can be successful without being impressive, that there's dignity in doing good work for fair pay, in going home at a reasonable hour, in not sacrificing your entire life on the altar of ambition. Patricia and I became friends. In that quiet way women of a certain age become friends. We didn't talk about our feelings much, or have dramatic heart-to-hearts. We just worked side by side, shared coffee in the morning, compared notes on recipes. She taught me to see failure differently, not as an ending, but as information. Not as a moral judgment, but as a learning curve. She'd failed twice and tried again, and that hadn't made her stupid or weak. It made her resilient, wise, human. On my 48th birthday, Patricia offered me a partnership in her company. Not ownership exactly, but a profit-sharing arrangement where I'd oversee the baking division and receive a percentage of what we earned. It was modest by my old standards, but my standards had changed. I said yes without hesitation. This felt right in a way my own business never had. Collaborative instead of isolating. Sustainable instead of explosive. Enough instead of endlessly more. We grew the company slowly over the next few years. Added to new clients. Hired 3 more staff members. Increased revenue by 20%. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make headlines or impress strangers. But it was real growth, the kind that didn't require sacrificing everything else to achieve. I worked reasonable hours. I saved money. I helped Claire with her remaining student loans. I took Sophie on a weekend trip for her high school graduation. Small things that added up to something that felt like wealth, though not the kind I'd once chased. I started sleeping better. The twitch in my eye went away. My back still hurt sometimes, but not constantly. I laughed more. I called old friends I'd lost touch with during the crisis years. I went on a few dates with a man I met through the catering business, though nothing came of it. I wasn't looking for someone to complete me or fix me. I was fine on my own, better than fine, whole in a way I'd never been when I was married or when I was building my empire. The bankruptcy stayed on my credit report for 7 years. I watched it like a countdown, that public record of my failure. When it finally disappeared, I felt lighter, not because I was ashamed of it, but because it no longer defined me in the eyes of banks and landlords and anyone who ran a background check. I'd rebuilt my credit slowly, paid every bill on time, proved I could be trusted with financial responsibility again. But more than that, I'd rebuilt my sense of self. I knew now what I was capable of surviving. Claire graduated college and got a job in her field. Sophie finished high school and chose to attend community college like I had, taking her time, working while studying, building something sustainable instead of impressive. She said I taught her that. I'd failed, lost everything, and survived. That was more valuable than any success story I could have given her. On the 10-year anniversary of my bankruptcy, I was 55 years old and standing in Patricia's kitchen testing a new recipe. It was early morning, the sun just coming up, the familiar routine of measuring and mixing and creating something from basic ingredients. And I thought about that day in the lawyer's office, my hands shaking, signing away everything I'd built. I thought about who I'd been then, desperate, ashamed, convinced my life was over. I wasn't that person anymore. I'd learned things that version of me needed to know. That your worth isn't measured by your business success or your bank account. That failure teaches more than success ever could. That losing everything material can help you find what actually matters. That wealth isn't about how much you accumulate, but about how you live, who you love, what you create, how you treat the people around you. I'd built something real this time. Not a business empire that required sacrificing my health and relationships. Not an impressive facade that looked good on the outside, but was rotting from within. I'd built a life that felt sustainable and human and good. I had work I enjoyed, daughters I was close to, friends I valued, enough money to live comfortably without constant anxiety, time to rest, space to breathe, permission to be ordinary. The bankruptcy had destroyed what I thought I wanted and forced me to discover what I actually needed. It stripped away everything I'd built my identity around and made me figure out who I was without the title, the business, the success story. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me and the thing that finally set me free. I still bake almost every day. Not because I have to prove something or build something impressive, but because I love it. Because creating something good with my own hands brings me joy. Because feeding people matters in a simple, essential way that doesn't need to be more complicated than that. The work is the same as it's always been, but I'm different now. I understand what I'm doing and why it matters, not because of what it might become, but because of what it is right now, in this moment. Some mornings I drive past the building where my old bakery used to be. There's a new business there now, something unrelated to food. The sign is different. The windows are painted a different color. But sometimes if the light hits it right, I can still see my reflection in the glass. Not the person I was then, frantic and drowning and convinced success was just one more expansion away. the person I am now, older, quieter, wiser, in ways that only come from surviving what you thought would destroy you. I don't regret the bankruptcy anymore. I don't wish I could go back and do things differently, because doing things differently would mean I never learned what I know now. That real wealth isn't about how much you own, but about how you live. That success isn't about impressing others, but about being at peace with yourself. That starting over isn't the end of your story, but sometimes the beginning of the part that actually matters. When people ask me about my business now, I tell them I work in catering. I don't mention the bankruptcy unless it's relevant, not because I'm hiding it, but because it's not the most interesting thing about me anymore. It's just something that happened, something I survived, something that taught me what I needed to know. The failure is part of my story, but it's not the whole story. Not even close. I'm 55 now, and I finally understand what my mother meant when she handed me that envelope all those years ago. She said it was an investment in my future. I thought she meant college, career, success as the world defines it. But I think she meant something deeper. She was investing in my ability to become whoever I needed to become, to learn whatever lessons life required me to learn, to survive whatever challenges came my way. The money paid for college, but the real investment was in my resilience, my capacity to get back up, my willingness to keep trying, even after failing spectacularly. That's the wealth I have now. Not the kind that shows up on balance sheets or impresses strangers at parties. The kind that lets me sleep at night. The kind that keeps me steady when things go wrong. The kind that makes me grateful for small joys and ordinary days. The kind that took losing everything to finally understand. I went bankrupt at 45, and it destroyed the life I thought I wanted. But in the ruins of that life, I built something better. Something sustainable. Something real. Something that taught me what wealth actually means.